In a distant galaxy, where stars burned cold and silence ruled the space between worlds, the Zarketh Dominion prepared for yet another ancient ritual, one that filled the hearts of its people with fear and trembling awe. On the volcanic world of Garken, beneath smoke-choked skies and rivers of glowing magma, the elders of the Dominion stood in a blackened temple, carved from stone older than any recorded history. They whispered in low voices as they looked upon the object of the ceremonious small capsule, no larger than a crate, shaking slightly with the quiet cries of a newborn baby inside. The child was human, the last survivor of a crashed Earthship that had dared to drift too close to Zarketh space. His parents, brave explorers or perhaps foolish wanderers, had died in the wreckage, and the aliens had taken the crying infant not as a prisoner, but as a gift. To them, the child was nothing more than a token of peace offering, or perhaps an act of desperate devotion. For they had decided to offer the baby to Vorik the Flame Eater, the galaxy's most feared and mysterious creature, a living dragon that dwelled deep in the molten caverns of Garken. Vorik was older than empires, a beast of wings and fire, whose roars caused distant moons to tremble. He did not speak in words, but in flames, and his rage had once destroyed entire fleets. He was neither god nor pet, but something in between, a force of nature worshipped and feared. Every few years, the Dominion gave him an offering to prevent his wrath. Usually it was a stone carved with prayers or rare minerals he seemed to treasure, but this time they chose something different. No one truly knew why. Perhaps it was fear, or perhaps they simply didn't value the life of one human baby. The elders marched up the black stone stairs, carrying the capsule like a cursed treasure, while the ground rumbled beneath their feet. The mouth of Vorik's lair stood open like a wound in the mountain, glowing with red light and a hot wine that carried the scent of ash and power. As they placed the baby at the entrance, the priests began to chant, hoping to calm the dragons. Fury should it awaken too soon, but nothing could prepare them for what came next. A deep growl echoed from within the mountain, louder than thunder, shaking loose stone from the walls. Heat poured from the cave like breath from a furnace, and then, with a gust of burning wind, Vorik emerged, his massive black body outlined in flame, wings stretched wide, eyes glowing like suns. The elders dropped to their knees, trembling. The baby cried louder, unaware of the monster looming above him. Vorik lowered his head slowly, his massive snout coming close to the capsule. The priests shut their eyes, expecting fire, expecting the child to be consumed in one swift blaze. But the flames did not come. Instead, Vorik sniffed the baby. A long silence followed. Then, with a strange sound like a deep rumble of thought, he gently curled his massive clawed hand around the capsule and pulled it into the shadows of the cave. The priests opened their eyes and looked at one another in confusion. This had never happened before. Vorik was supposed to destroy what was given, not take it inside. They waited for hours, but no roar came, no smoke, no screams, only silence. The baby had not been eaten, he had been taken. The priests, shaken and afraid, returned to their temple and reported what they had seen. The Dominion's High Council met in secret, wondering if this was a sign of some dark prophecy. Had Vorik gone mad? Was this a warning? No one knew, and deep within the mountain, in the heart of fire and stone, Vorik lay curled around the small capsule. The baby, now quiet, looked up at the dragon with wide eyes, reaching out with tiny fingers toward the glowing scales. Vorik watched him, with ancient, unreadable eyes, and after a long moment, let out a low, warm hum that echoed through the cave like a lullaby made of thunder. For the first time in living memory, the flame meter did not burn what was offered, he kept it, and something deep in the galaxy shifted, unnoticed by the powers that ruled. Something had begun, something strange and new, and neither dragon nor dominion had any idea what would grow from that single, simple act of mercy. Years passed like smoke drifting through the volcanic skies of Garken, and deep within the fiery mountain, the human child grew, not in a cradle or with lullabies, but in the heart of flame and stone under the watchful eyes of Vorik the Flame Eater. Kale, as the dragon named him in the old tongue of the Fireborn, learned to walk not on smooth floors, but on sharp black rock, and his first steps were taken beside rivers of molten lava that hissed and bubbled like living beasts. The mountain was no home for humans, yet somehow Kale survived, and not just survived, he thrived. Vorik built a shelter of cooled stone inside the great cavern, placing it near the edge of a glowing pit that kept Kale warm through the long, dark nights. The dragon brought him rare fruits scorched by fire, minerals that could be ground into drinkable powder, and glowing crystals that hummed softly with energy. Kale listened to Vorik's deep growls, hums, and flame symbols burned into rock, and though they were not words a human would understand, the boy learned to read them. It was as if he could feel the meaning behind each sound, each flicker of heat, as though his heart beat to the rhythm of the volcano itself. As Kale grew older, he began to climb the mountain walls, race with winged fire lizards, and even ride on Vorik's back when the dragon soared through tunnels of smoke or across the dark sky during rare nights when the stars could be seen. But the world outside the volcano never forgot the boy. The Dominion, still unsure of what had happened years ago, watched from afar. Drones sent to spy on the mountain vanished without a trace. The priests who had once offered Kale now whispered that the Flame Eater was no longer their god, but something else, something changed by the presence of a human child. Kale himself had questions. He had never seen another human, never heard a human voice except in his dreams. Vorik told him stories through glowing images about the stars, about the time before the Dominion ruled, and even about the wars that nearly destroyed all life. Kale listened quietly, often staring into the lava with questions in his eyes. Why had he survived? Why had Vorik spared him? And what was his place in a galaxy that thought he was gone? One day, while exploring a narrow tunnel that Vorik rarely entered, Kale discovered a sealed chamber hidden behind a wall of obsidian. Inside, he found ancient human wreckage, pieces of a broken escape pod, scorched photos of smiling faces, and a cracked device that flickered with faded images. One of them showed a man and a woman holding a baby, his baby self laughing together under a blue sky. Kale stared at the image for hours, unable to look away. It was the first proof he had ever seen that he came from somewhere else, that he was not born of fire, but of people with skin like his and eyes full of dreams. When he returned to Vorik, he didn't speak, he simply placed the broken device at the dragon's feet. Vorik stared at it silently, then released a low, sorrowful growl that echoed through the caverns. Kale understood. Vorik had known all along. The dragon had chosen not to tell him, perhaps to protect him, or perhaps because he feared what would happen if the boy learned the truth too soon. From that day on, Kale changed. He still laughed when flying on Vorik's back, still ran through the tunnels with joy, but in his heart, he now carried a deep hunger to know more about his past and the world outside. Vorik sensed this and became more protective, warning Kale with bursts of flame etched into stone. The outside is not ready, the messages said. You are not ready, but Kale could not stay forever in shadows. One night, he crept out of the cave while Vorik slept in his lava pool. The air outside was sharp and cold, so different from the warmth he had always known. He moved silently across the mountain until he reached a high ridge where he could see the horizon. Lights blinked in the far distant alien cities, moving ships, signs of life. Kale's heart beat faster. He knew then that he was not just the child of fire, he was something new, something between human and dragon, and he needed to understand who he truly was. But as he stared into the night, he felt eyes watching him. Not Vorik's, but something else, metallic, sharp, distant. Far above, hidden in the clouds, a surveillance drone hovered silently, capturing every detail. Somewhere across the galaxy, in a council room filled with cold beings, a signal flashed, subject alive. Human child confirmed. Flame Eater has not destroyed him. Alarms echoed quietly behind steel doors. Kale turned back toward the cave, unaware of what had just begun. The Dominion would not let this continue. The Flame Eater's bond with a human child was not a miracle in their eyes, it was a threat. Suspicion turned to fear, and fear turned to plans. Kale returned to Vork's side that night, curling beside the warm stone as he had done as a small child. The dragon opened one glowing eye and wrapped his tail protectively around the boy. Neither of them spoke, but both could feel that the mountain was no longer just their home. It was about to become something else. The peace was ending, and the fire that had raised the boy might soon be tested against a galaxy that did not believe in love, mercy, or the bond between two lost creatures who had found each other in a world of ash and stars. The air inside the volcano felt heavier now, not from the heat, but from the questions burning in Kale's heart, questions that only grew after finding the broken image of his parents and learning that he was not born in fire, but lost in it. Vork watched him with quiet eyes, saying nothing, but Kale could feel the dragons roaring each time he wandered too far from the lava pools or climbed high toward the mountain's edge. Something had changed between them, not in anger, but in silence. Kale still loved Vork, still trusted him more than anything, yet the curiosity inside him had become stronger than the warmth of the cave. One day, with the glowing stone hidden in his pocket and a hood made from Vork's shed scales pulled over his head, Kale stepped out of the only home he had ever known and followed the path down the mountain. The ground below was strange and dry. The sky stretched wide above him with no stone ceiling to protect him. He walked for hours through ash-covered fields until the black mountains gave way to dead grass and old ruins. As the sun faded, he found what remained of an old earth outpost, walls torn down, machines rusted, and signs written in a language that tugged at something deep in his mind. He stepped inside a broken building, the metal groaning beneath his feet, and found another data core silent but intact. When he touched it, lights flickered and a small hologram played. A woman's voice, soft and kind, whispered his name. It was his mother. Kale froze, watching her smile, hearing her speak of Earth, of home, and of hope. The message ended with her saying she loved him and promising they would always be together. He sat there for a long time, not crying, but feeling something strange inside: pain, love, and a pull toward something he had never known but always needed. When he stood, the sky had darkened, and lights blinked in the distant alien cities. He hid his face and moved closer, staying in the shadows. As he walked through the outer rings of a nearby alien town, he saw creatures of all kinds, tall, short, scaled, and smooth. None looked like him. In the market, traders shouted in strange tongues, and guards in dark armor watched every corner. Kale moved carefully, listening to their talk. He heard stories of humans spoken like myths, as weak, emotional beings who were now extinct. Some laughed at how easy it was to defeat them. Others said they never existed. Kale's heart beat faster. He wanted to speak, to say they were wrong, but he stayed silent. In a small alley, he saw a creature being beaten by two guards. The creature was small and shaking, begging for mercy. Kale felt a fire rise in his chest, not from anger, but from the part of him that could not stand injustice. He stepped forward, without thinking, and shouted for them to stop. The guards turned, surprised by his voice and appearance. They asked who he was, but before they could grab him, Kale raised his hand, and a sudden burst of heat flashed from his palm, just enough to scare them back. He didn't know how he did it, but the fire responded to him, just like it did for Vork. The guards fell back, calling for reinforcements. Kale ran, pulling his hood tighter, darting through alleys and streets until he was out of the city, and back among the rocks. He knew now the truth: the galaxy feared humans not because they were weak, but because of what they could become. He had something inside him, something that came not just from blood, but from love and fire. But someone else had seen him, too. High above the city, a watching eye blinked. A drone that had followed him since he left the mountain. The signal reached the Zarketh High Council, and the news spread like a spark in dry grass: the human child lives. The Flame Eater raised him, He walks among us, the council panicked. Their leaders declared Kale a threat, a danger to the Dominion. They gave him a name, the Flame Heir, and placed a silent bounty on his head. Anyone who found him was to report immediately. Kale returned to the mountain in the dead of night, slipping through the dark paths until he reached the glowing cave. Vork waited for him, his great head resting on the stone, his eyes dim but alert. Kale dropped to his knees beside him, showing the glowing crystal, the data core, and his bruised hand from the fire. Vork stared for a long time, then etched a message into the wall. "You are awakening, but danger has awakened too." Kale nodded, feeling the weight of it. He wasn't just a boy anymore. He wasn't just human. He was a piece of something bigger, something that could either save or break what remained of hope in a tired galaxy. He looked at Vork, not with fear, but with resolve. If the Dominion wanted to silence the truth, then he would speak louder. If they feared what he could become, then he would show them what it meant to be raised by flame and heart. The human within him had risen, and the galaxy would soon feel its warmth. Smoke curled from the top of the mountain as Kale stood at the edge of the glowing cliff, his eyes locked on the stars above, knowing that somewhere beyond those distant lights, powerful forces were planning his end. The wind howled around him, carrying whispers of coming danger, and deep inside the mountain, Vork stirred from his rest, sensing the storm rising from the galaxy that had long feared anything it could not control. Kale had not spoken much since returning from the alien city, but his silence carried weight, and his heart was no longer filled with questions, it was now full of purpose. Vork called him closer and revealed a truth hidden for generations, using glowing fire glyphs, burned into the cavern walls. Long ago, during the Forgotten Wars, dragons like Vork ruled the skies not with terror, but with wisdom, until one of them formed a bond with a human, a connection so powerful that it changed the way the dragon saw life. That dragon chose compassion over power, and together, they tried to bring peace to a divided galaxy, but the Dominion feared that bond, so they destroyed every record of it, hunted down the dragons, and erased the name of the human who had once flown beside Flame. Vork had lived in hiding ever since, waiting, watching, and hoping that one day, another human would be born who could carry that bond again. Kale was not an accident, he was destiny answering an ancient call. Kale felt the truth sink deep into his bones. He was never meant to be a sacrifice. He was meant to become something more, a bridge between fear and fire, between strength and heart. But now, the galaxy saw him as a threat, a living crack in the walls of the Dominion's control, and they would come to seal it shut. Vork asked him a question, not with words, but with fire. "Will you stay, or will you rise?" Kale looked into the dragon's ancient eyes and knew there was only one choice. He could not hide while others lived in chains. He would not remain in the shadows while lies ruled the stars. He would fly not to destroy, but to awaken. Together, they began to prepare. Vork took Kale into hidden tunnels beneath the volcano, where old artifacts of the dragon's lost age still burned with power. Kale trained his mind and body, learning to control the fire that now answered his call. He no longer feared his gift, he embraced it. The bond between him and Vork grew stronger, and they moved like one boy and dragon, flame and breath. Word spread quietly across the stars, carried by rebel signals and whispered codes. A message from Kale appeared on secret networks, short but powerful. "I am human, I live, and I am not alone." Some laughed, but others believed. In corners of the galaxy, where the Dominion's grip had turned life to dust, hope flickered to life. Small uprisings began. Silent protests turned loud. The idea of a human raised by a dragon, speaking of peace, frightened the Dominion more than any army. They sent warships toward Garkin, not to fight, but to erase. Vork sensed them before the stars even shifted. He and Kale stood at the mouth of the mountain, watching the sky darken with approaching ships. Vork asked once more with fire, "Destroy or defend?" Kale answered not with anger, but with clarity. "We show them we are not what they fear, we are what they forgot." As the first ships descended, Vorik rose into the air, wings wide like the night sky set ablaze, with Kale riding on his back, cloaked in glowing scales. The ships fired warning shots, but Vorik dodged them with ease. Kale reached out with his hands, guiding flame not as a weapon, but as a shield. He drew a path of fire in the sky, not to burn, but to be seen. Broadcasts lit up across the galaxy, capturing the image, the boy and the dragon, flying together, not attacking, but declaring their truth. It was not a battle, it was a choice. The Dominion saw this and grew afraid. One commander hesitated, another refused to fire. On planets far away, people began to rise, holding signs, speaking Kale's name. He had become more than a secret, he had become a symbol. But not all would accept this change. A second fleet approached, larger and colder, led by machines that knew no fear. Vorik looked at Kale and waited. Kale knew what had to be done. He sent one final message: we come with fire, not to destroy, but to light the way. The machines did not care. They fired. Vorik turned and faced them alone, drawing their fire away from Kale, unleashing the full fury of the ancient flame, not for glory, but for protection. Kale watched from above, unable to stop what had already begun. In the end, Vorik's fire burned brighter than ever before, shaking the sky, breaking the machine fleet apart, but at a cost. The dragon fell, wings torn, body broken, but his flame never truly faded. Kale landed beside him, tears falling onto the scorched ground, and Vorik etched one final word into the stone with his claw. Live. As the world watched, Kale stood, alone beside the fallen dragon. He raised his hand and let the fire rise around him, not in rage, but in promise. He would not let Vorik's sacrifice be forgotten. He would not let fear win. The fire within him now carried a purpose, and the galaxy, once silent, had begun to listen. The world stood still as Kale knelt beside Vorik's broken body, the heat of the final battle still glowing in the sky, ashes falling like silent snow. Across the scorched mountain, around him, the air trembled with grief, but also with something new: hope, thin and uncertain, yet alive. Vorik's last word, burned into the stone with his final breath, echoed through Kale's heart like a whisper from the stars. Live. Kale looked up, his face streaked with soot and tears, and rose slowly to his feet, the fire inside him no longer wild or confused, but focused, calm, and full of purpose. The skies above, once filled with warships and fire, were now quiet as the Dominion's fleets withdrew, shaken not by defeat in battle, but by the strength of something they could not understand: compassion, courage, and the bond between a boy and a dragon. Across the galaxy, news of Vorik's fall and Kale's message spread faster than light, carried by voices that had long been silenced. People who once whispered in fear now spoke aloud. Flags of rebellion were raised not with weapons, but with words and unity. Kale, once just a child left at the mouth of a volcano, had become a living symbol of everything the Dominion had tried to erase. He stayed on the mountain for days, alone with Vorik's body, carving glowing messages into the stone, sharing the dragon's history, their story, and the truth that had been buried for so long. One by one, beings from different planets arrived not as soldiers, but as mourners. They stood at the edge of the volcano in silence, paying respect not only to a mighty creature, but to the bond that had changed the galaxy. Kale did not speak much, but when he did, his words were clear and strong. He told them that Vorik had not raised him to fight, but to choose kindness when others chose fear, to choose peace when others chose power. He spoke of love, not weakness, of fire, not destruction. His voice reached far corners of the stars, and slowly, the Dominion's power began to crack. Colonies that had bowed for generations now stood tall. Young voices rose with new courage, and even old enemies found reason to speak again. But Kale knew his journey was not over. One night, under a quiet sky filled with unfamiliar stars, he returned to the deepest part of the volcano where Vorik used to sleep. There, Hidden beneath layers of black stone, he found a glowing egg, warm to the touch and pulsing with life. Vorik had left behind more than memories, he had left behind the future. Kale placed his hand gently on the egg, feeling its warmth reach into his soul. He understood then that fire was not only an end, it was a beginning. He took the egg and built a new home, not in hiding, but in the open, a place where beings of all kinds could come to learn, speak, and grow. The sanctuary rose from the ashes of the mountain, shining like a beacon across the stars. Kale became its heart, the first of many who believed that strength was not in fear or silence, but in truth and connection. The Dominion tried to silence him again, but it was too late. The fire had already spread. Peace did not come quickly, and there were still battles to face, but the galaxy had changed. Kale never called himself a leader, only a guardian of the bond that saved him, a protector of the dragon's heart. And years later, when the egg hatched and a small dragon opened its bright golden eyes for the first time, Kale smiled and whispered the same name that had once been given to him in flame. Kale, a name that now meant more than survival, it meant hope.